Yes, it's recording, I think.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So, as I was saying, that we talked about what are the components of extracellular matrix. Although from tissue to tissue type, the various proteins and the polysaccharides, what kind of protein and what kind of polysaccharide is present, it varies. But we saw few very common type of ECM components like collagen, fibronectin, okay, hyaluronate, etc. And we looked at few key characteristic of a particular ECM molecule. Well, we also saw that people have mimicked the cell binding domains like RGD domains, which are present in the very large ECM molecule via a small peptide, and they have attached it to a scaffold on which the cells can then adhere. So these kind of engineering techniques are used to mimic the cellular microenvironment that is there inside the body. So in today's session, we will talk about the cellular component of the tissue. So in our body, there are around 200 different fully mature cell types. I note I'm talking about only the fully mature cell types. I'm not talking about the stem cells or any other progenitor cells, etc. Okay, I'm talking only about the differentiated cell types. So, and if we can categorize them, these 200 cell types, we can do so by putting them into two groups. One is called epithelial, another is called mesenchymal. Okay, so what are epithelial cells? You will get to know like which type of cell will fall into which category once I'll discuss these two categories in detail. Epithelial cells, they generally grow as a two-dimensional sheets, means they form planar sheets. There is not much height in the z direction, but only the cell growth is predominant in x and y direction. Okay, sheet type. And also the cells that are present in this kind of epithelial tissue, they have a cuboidal kind of a geometry. They are very tightly connected with their neighboring cells, and these cells cannot migrate individually. Okay, the cellular sheet, if you say, this epithelial cellular sheet, the one side of the sheet is there is something called basal lamina is present. Basal lamina is also called basement membrane. That basement membrane is present, and this basement membrane is acellular. It only contains ECM components. Okay, and so if we can imagine, if you can imagine with me that there is one layer of epithelial cells. Just below this layer there is basal lamina, and below the basal lamina layer there is a layer of mesenchymal cells. Okay, so this is kind of arrangement that people have observed in tissues like epithelial tissues, like in our skin tissue has a similar kind of arrangement, but the top layer is the epidermis layer consisting of keratinocytes, and the cells are completely flat and they are like sheet, they are forming a sheet. Okay, and this is multi-layered, and below the epidermis layer there is a basement membrane or basal lamina. Okay, so these are interchangeable term. This only contains the ECM component. It basically gives another support. Okay, one and for making the tissue mechanically rigid. And below the basal lamina there is a dermis layer where the fibroblasts are there. Okay, so this kind of arrangement is predominantly seen. Okay, now I've talked that mesenchymal cells are often present below a layer of epithelial cells. So what are mesenchymal cells, or which kind of differentiated cells would you like place under this broad category of mesenchymal cells? So don't confuse it with mesenchymal stem cells. Okay, though that is completely different. Here I'm terming those differentiated cells as a mesenchymal cells. So these the term mesenchyme, okay, it actually suggests that these cells like to live alone, and they are often too small and loosely connected. Means these cells doesn't have to be in contact with these neighboring cells, because of which they can migrate individually. And these cells often have a bipolar shape, not a cuboidal kind of a shape, but the growth of these cells is contact inhibited. So if any of you have done any course related to cancer biology or even studied about cancer, so you know the cancerous cells are immortal, right? And also this contact inhibition thing is lost in those cells, because of which they can grow like numerous times and form a mass, right, or a tumor. But a normal cell, a healthy cell, they have the property of contact inhibition. So if a cell membrane comes in contact with a neighboring cell's membrane, the growth or the cell division will stop, right? So this property exists in these mesenchymal cells. So if you can imagine how the epithelial cells and how the mesenchymal cells look like through this figure. So on your left hand side, you can see a typical epithelial cells, where this is one cell and it is very tightly connected with its neighboring cells, and it has a kind of a cuboidal shape. So this is a cross section, okay, cross section. Not if and but if you look at from the top, if you look at the tissue from the top, you will see that it's a plain surface. Or even if you look at your skin, okay, and you see that the keratinocytes are forming a smooth planar layer. So this kind of an arrangement epithelial cells have, and then they form epithelial tissue. Whereas, so here in this cross section, you can see that the bottom part, this is the cross section of epithelial tissue, where this is an epithelial cell. The bottom part of this tissue will have the basement lamina, and below the basement lamina there will be a layer of mesenchymal cell. And this is the typical morphology of a mesenchyme in singular or mesenchymal cell. So as I said, this cell has a bipolar morphology. So these are the two ends, two poles are there. So that is why bipolar. And these cells, they like to live alone. Okay, so they are not in tight contact with its neighboring cells. So this is how you can categorize all the 200 types of differentiated cells in our body into either epithelial cell or either mesenchyme cell. So I can give you like as I said, keratinocyte is a typical example of epithelial cell. Similarly, the fibroblast cells, which are there in the dermis layer, they fall into the mesenchymal cell type. Okay, so if you look at different tissues, like this, I have just given you the example of skin because it is easy to imagine. You can similarly look into the cells which are present in a heart, and look at their morphology, how they are arranged. Okay, whether they're tightly connected with each other, or the cells like to live alone. So this kind of characterization, if you do this kind of observation for each organ type, you'll be able to categorize the cells which are there in that organ into either epithelial cell or either mesenchymal cell. Is it clear to everyone till now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
So thank you for responding. So one more point to note, that the epithelials are the defining features of early embryo. Okay, so I'm talking about the developmental stage, the stage when you get a fertilized ovum, and from which subsequently a fetus or a new baby will born. So I'm talking about that state. So in the early embryo, it is the epithelial cells, or the cells that will later on become the epithelial tissue. So those cells are actually defining, means forming a boundary of the embryo, okay, outside or the periphery of the embryo. And in between, the core of that embryo basically consists of these mesenchymal cells, and they appear as fillers, okay. So through interactions between epithelia and mesenchyme, the embryo develops diverse structures, and these diverse structures subsequently will form the mature tissue and organ, right? So this is from the perspective of developmental biology. Now I've talked about the cells, right? Now the cell and ECM are the main components of the tissue. So now I'll talk about the various tissue types. So again, each organ, you can, if you look at the anatomy book, you will see that they have given various names, you know, um, like very complex names you will find. But when you look at their properties, basic properties, you will see the property of the intestinal lining and the property of the outermost layer of the skin, they are similar. So which is why both are categorized into the broad umbrella of epithelial tissue. Similarly, you will see, if you compare the property of a bone with the property of cartilage, you will see what function, if they're playing similar function, okay, if their role in their body is similar. So that is why they are placed into a broad tissue category of connective tissue. So in this manner, we have divided the enormous tissue type in our body into basically five types. First is the epithelial tissue, then there is connective tissue, then there is muscular tissue, nervous tissue, and glandular tissue. These five types. So all these have a particular function that they play in our body. So the role of epithelial tissue is to provide a covering. Okay, so epidermis is the outermost layer. Basically, it covers the layers of skin, or you can say the blood vessels or the fatty tissue that is present. So it is providing a covering. Then connective tissue, its role is to provide support, like bone, right? Without the bones in our body, we won't be having this strength to do stuff, right? Then there is muscular tissue, the skeletal muscles, the cardiac muscles. So their role is to control our movement of our hand, legs, mouth, like I'm talking. It is because of the muscles, the coordinated, how the muscles are coordinating with each other. Then there is nervous tissue. So there are neurons, right? So they send electrical impulses, because of which we can think, we can think what to do, what to speak. So this control over organ function, our speech or movement, everything is done by the nervous tissue. And lastly, there is glandular tissues. So those tissues which who has the primary role to secrete some protein product. Okay, so these are the five tissue types. First, let's go into bit detail. So during this discussion, I will not go into thorough detail, like very in depth. Okay, so if you want to know even very basic biology of each kind of tissue, each type of organ, I would ask you to go to a library and issue a anatomy book. Okay, in the anatomy book, you will find the immense amount of details that you need. This is just a primer, okay, for the subsequent discussions that we'll have later on. The epithelial tissues, they are typically characterized by the number of epithelial cells that they contain and the shape of cells that is present in each of these sheets. So that is, and the name, the nomenclature that is given to different epithelial tissue depends on how many layers of epithelial sheets are there and what is the geometry or the morphology of the cells that is present. So if there is single layer of cell, so those epithelial tissues are called simple epithelia. epithelia means plural. Then stratified epithelia means there is multiple layers of cells. And if the epithelial tissue has a flattened cells, like the cells look like a fried egg, okay, very flat. So here in figure A, you will see the cells are quite flat. So this kind of morphology is called squamous morphology, and since it is forming an epithelial tissue, so it is called squamous epithelia. So here the morphology of the cells is like cuboid. So it is called cuboidal epithelial. So here in figure D, the cells are like columns. Okay. So this is columnar cells. So the epithelial is called columnar epithelium. And this is figure E is basically showing how the stratified epithelial, where multiple layers of cells are there, look like. Okay, so you can see there is 4 layers, 1 2 3 4 layers. Whereas in figure C, you will see that uh, it might look like that there are multiple layers in figure C, but it is not. So that is why it is called pseudo stratified epithelial. So here what is happening, the position of the nucleus of each cell is like random, like up and down, up and down. So from the position of this nucleus in figure E, I could say that there are 4 layers, but here it might look like there are 2 layers, but in fact it is only a single layer of cells, and they look multi-layered, or they look stratified, because the position of the nucleus is like is not stable, like all the nucleus is not present in the same plane, they are present in different planes. So this is how this is all about the epithelial tissue. Now about connective tissues. So as I already told you that the role of connective tissue is to provide mechanical support. Okay, so if you look at all the organs that are present in our body, you can basically tell whether that organ belongs to connective tissue or glandular tissue or nervous tissue. So by doing that only, we can say that bone, cartilage, tendon, ligaments, the dermis layer of the skin, they all fall into the broad category of connective tissue. All right. Another role is that they can store much of body's fluid. So if you look at our blood, or if you look at the fat tissue or fatty tissue, there most of the body fluid, the water content, is present in these two tissue types. And blood, as you know, have the macrophages, right, and there is antigen presenting cell, etc. So they basically aid in immune response. So connective tissue, another role of connective tissue is to aid in immune response, and they are often important in tissue repair. So for now I'll tell you how in very brief, but in subsequent discussion when we'll talk about tissue dynamics, like how wound healing or tissue homeostasis happens, so these kind of tissue dynamic states, when we'll talk about, there you will understand how connective tissues are actually important for tissue repair. So for now you can think like when you have a cut, a small cut on your skin, okay, and you can see often that there is a whitish tissue growing to fill that small wound. Have you ever noticed that when the healing has completely completed, like you don't feel any pain, so you can often see a whitish kind of a tissue. Have you ever seen that? So that tissue is basically fibrous tissue, and it mainly consists of collagen and very small population of fibroblast. So this is a type of a connective tissue. And why I'm saying that connective tissue, because without that the mechanical integrity of that particular area would not be there. Okay, it is providing that mechanical support on that area. So this is about connective tissue. So this connective tissue basically originates from the mesoderm. Okay, so during gastrulation process, the entire embryo gets divided into three layers, right? Ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm, right? From the endoderm, uh, most of the organs actually develop, right? Like our heart, liver, etc. Whereas from the mesoderm, the connective tissues develop, like bone, cartilage, ligaments, etc. And from the ectoderm, it is the skin that develops. So this is how you can say how the origin of different organs in our body. You can read more about it in an anatomy book. Okay. Now, most of the movements in our body, they are caused by the fibers in muscle tissues that contract forcefully upon shortening. So till now I have discussed about connective tissue. Now I'll go and discuss about the muscular tissue. So when we are moving here and there, or moving our arms or fingers, so it is happening because of the contraction and relaxation of the muscle fibers, right? So you can now divide the muscle tissue, the broad category of muscle tissue, into three types. So first type is the skeletal muscle, second type is the cardiac muscle, and third is the smooth muscle. Okay, so these are three types of muscle tissue. So till now whatever I have discussed, I'm sure you guys have read it somewhere during your throughout your life, like in maybe in class 12 biology, or you're maybe studying about it now. So I think it won't be that much difficult for you guys to grasp it. Am I correct? Everything is clear till now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
So yeah, so as I was saying, that you can divide the muscle tissue into three types. First is the skeletal muscle. So this type of muscle, it it is connected to our bone. Okay, so because of which it can pull on the bones and cause movements. And these muscle fibers are also called myofibers. They are striated. Okay, means रेशे रेशे जैसे होते हैं, ठीक है? Like अगर कोई non vegetarian है तो if you can imagine how the chicken look like, if you cut it, the cooked chicken, not the कच्चा वाला chicken. If you cut the cooked chicken, you can see some fibers, रेशे रेशे types. So that if you can imagine the term striated in that way. Okay, and these myofibers are multinucleated. That is, one fiber can have multiple nucleus. So you can definitely Google it as well to see the image of these skeletal myofibers. Then there's cardiac muscle. Now these cardiac muscles, they are part of our heart, as the term cardiac suggests, and their main role is to cause pumping of the heart, because of which the blood circulation is happening. And these cardiac myofibers, they are striated just like skeletal muscles, but each myofiber contains only one nucleus. And these fibers are branched. Okay, these fibers are branched. Okay, and they are connected to each other at junctions, and these junctions are called intercalated junctions. These junctions or the integrated disc, these are nothing but gap junction through which propagation of action potential happens. So these big terms, like might confuse you, but it is similar to what happens between two neurons, how two neurons communicate with one another. There is some gap, right? That is called synaptic gap, through which neurotransmitters released, and then it is detected by another neuron. In a similar way, in a very similar way, this intercalated disc are those gaps. Okay, and that that facilitates the propagation of an electrical impulse in between the cardiomyofibers. Okay, that is why you can see the cardiomyocytes if you culture cardiomyocytes from an animal like mice etc., or you can take a cancerous one, you will see that beating effect even in vitro in a tissue culture flask and all. You can see some literature where people have done it. Now the last category of muscle is the smooth muscle. As the name suggests, they are smooth in nature, means they do not have striations. So only skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle has striations. Okay, and these smooth muscles, they are present primarily in the hollow organs. Okay, and their role is to allow you know passage of some substance through alternate contraction and relaxation motion. So when we eat our food, there is esophagus. So there the food undergoes peristaltic movement. So these are very familiar terms, I hope, from class 12 biology at least. So these peristaltic movement, because of that, the food is reaching. So the esophagus contains this smooth muscle. Similarly, in our blood vessels also, when the blood vessels dilates and contracts, okay, with the change in the pressure of the blood flow. So that happens because smooth muscles are there, okay, forming one layer around outside the endothelial cells. So when this kind of a function is required, then smooth muscle will be there to support it. Is there any queries so far? I think I've already run past our allotted time. So if there are any queries, I can address them, and maybe I should stop here. Okay, because it is already 6 or 7. Are there any queries? Are there any queries from your side till now?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
No, ma'am.
Okay. I'll stop here, and we'll continue our discussion on the various kind of tissue types in the next week. In the next week, that is on 14th. But on 14th, we will also discuss the research article that I have shared with you guys. So if you have opened it, you would have seen that it is published in around 1999, and it is published in the Lancet journal, which is the highest the impact factor journal in the world. So there, the definition of tissue engineering is given, and also how uh, they have basically defined that entire field of tissue engineering. And the two pioneers of this field, Robert Langer and Joseph Vacanti, they are the authors of that paper. So fun fact about Robert Langer, he is actually a chemical engineer professor at MIT in US. Okay, so he's still alive, by the way, and he is doing fabulous work since and he's kind of a pioneering person. So we will discuss what that paper has to say on 14th. So I'll request you guys to go through that paper. It's hardly 2 or 3 pages, okay, and it's a review article. So I don't think you guys would have too much difficulty in understanding the concept, but we'll still discuss. And if you have any queries while reading that paper, we will also take up that. Okay, so thank you guys for joining. I'll end this meeting. Okay, you guys can leave
Thank
now.
you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, attendance should be there.
Yes. I forgot. Thanks for reminding. So one by one, you guys can tell me your name so that I can mark it.
Bhupendra Sahu.
Bhupendra. Okay, next.
Satyam Bhatla.
Janvi.
Satyam Bhatla. Janvi. Achha, Janvi, why didn't you why weren't you present during the quiz? Is there any particular reason? You joined
Yes,
late
ma'am.
actually.
Actually, there is some Wi-Fi connection is lost. Network
Okay,
issue, like.
okay, in your home. Okay, okay, fine. Next, after Janvi, who is left?
Nidhi Priya.
Nidhi Priya. I think Aditya cannot speak. No worries, I remember. So I'll mark his name. Okay. So Harshita left. Harshita was also there, I think. Fine, no worries.
Ma'am, Harshita and Murli.
Harshita, na? Let me mark anyway. Maybe she has lost her connection in between.
You cannot tell that.
Huh? What?
She might have lost her connection.
Yeah.
That is why she is not.
Able to join again. Yeah, you don't, not a problem. So, I have marked your attendance. You guys can leave the meeting now. Okay.